It's a car crash, and it's bad. They've got to get to the ER now. The baby was uninjured until the ambulance was hit by a car going through an intersection and...
She flew off her mother's lap, slid out of the stretcher restraints,
fell off the bench seat,
was hit by a monitor.
Every ride in an ambulance is dangerous to a child who isn't properly restrained. It's estimated ground EMS responds to nearly 30 million emergency calls a year in the U.S. 6.2 million patients are transported, 10% of them children. Every year, approximately 10,000 of those ambulances crash, resulting in injuries or death. 1,000 of those ambulances that crash are carrying kids. Something's got to change. After all, we're here to help. In this training video, you'll hear from experts why it's important to appropriately restrain and so safeguard children in ambulances. You'll learn about pediatric restraint devices and see a demonstration of how to use the equipment to properly restrain and transport children. You'll also get some tips on safe pediatric transport.
No, my baby has to stay with me. No, she's fine.
So we've just seen some footage and statistics that really make you stop and think. Why are restraints so important?
Important for the safety of the child as well as the responder, the medical responder.
I agree, and those are some staggering statistics. I think it indicates that we need to do something to try to help the safety and provide the safest possible transport for these children in our ambulances.
I think one of the huge benefits in what EMSC is doing in North Carolina is it is making people very conscious and aware of some of the problems that can occur. It's making an attempt to educate people that are working on ambulances. As a training officer, the #1 rule that I have is a duty to warn. And so the information is coming out there through EMSC and through this program, so people are conscious of these problems now. I think that's the first step to the process.
Well, I know for one, in my role as a EMSC program manager, that I typically get a lot of calls from EMS personnel and EMS agencies asking me about what is the proper way to restrain children when they're being transported in an ambulance, and are there any guidelines out there, and give us some direction. We really want to do the right thing. And pretty much what I try to do is tell them that there hasn't really been anything that's come down really firmly from the national level, but we've tried to move ahead in the state and put some guidance in place. And one of the things that we've done more recently is in our EMS and trauma rules, we actually have a citation in there, ground ambulance vehicle and equipment requirements, that specifically requires ambulances to have available a pediatric restraint device to safely transport pediatric patients who are under 40 pounds when they're being transported in the back compartment of an ambulance. And that used to be 20 pounds, but we had recently, probably within the past year, increased that to 40 pounds because of the general availability of restraint devices that could be used for that weight range. So in your experience as EMTs, and speaking primarily to Myron and David, Do you see that these restraint devices are actually available for use on the ambulance itself, or do you feel they're more commonly obtained, say the restraint is off-site somewhere and has to be brought to the scene? And can you discuss the advantages and disadvantages of either of those scenarios?
One of the big changes we started seeing is in ambulances a couple years ago is they started to put car seats into the captain's chairs in the ambulance. So that was a pretty significant change that we started seeing. There are other pieces of equipment that are starting to hit the market now that are becoming more and more available to EMS personnel. And through some of the grants that have been offered to EMS services, we've been able to purchase those pieces of equipment. A piece of equipment is only as good as the education and the information that's attached to that. So that's a big component of that. Is a lot of people neglect to educate their providers. They put a piece of equipment on and just assume that they'll use it appropriately. So the equipment is there. The education is slowly but surely leaking out. The duty to warn is there. So I think that we're going to start seeing these significant changes being made as far as transporting kids.
I'm assuming that there are some restraint devices that might be easier to store on an ambulance and might even be a little easier to use. Can you talk a little bit about, just in general terms, what some of these devices are and how easy is it to use these various devices?
Myron?
The piece of vinyl that looks like just a plastic car seat on a roll is probably one of the more common devices that we see. It attaches to the ambulance stretcher with 4 straps, and then you have the 5-point harness that secures the child. They're relatively simple to use, but as Dave has already mentioned, if we put equipment on our trucks just because the state says it has to be there and we don't educate our personnel, are we doing more harm than good?
What about the child safety seat? I'm thinking in particular the convertible child safety seats that can be used for both an infant and an older child, say up to the size of 40 pounds. How practical is that for using that in an ambulance? And is it possible to have that in the ambulance compartment, or is there just not enough room?
Yeah. So when we're talking about transporting kids, we're talking about 2 populations, the sick child and the child that's being transported with a parent or guardian. So depending on what circumstances we're dealing with, it's going to change the equipment that we use. When we're dealing with a child that is experiencing some degree of an emergency, time is of the essence. So an important thing with this equipment is making sure that it's user-friendly. Our focus is patient care. And if we have a piece of equipment that's going to require so much energy in the whole setup process, it's taken away from what we're there to do. The device that we've discussed already, it's pretty user-friendly. There are some devices on the market that require a lot of energy, requires a lot of additional equipment to set them up. So the goal is to have a device that is very easily set up and is not going to take away from the patient care.
I just want to move back a couple steps and ask our physician panelist a question. Cheryl, what do you have any experience with when an injured child or ill child comes into your emergency department? Have there been any instances where you've noticed that the child, was not restrained in the ambulance? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's unfortunately probably more common than I would like that we see children roll in on their parents' lap, and the parent is strapped onto the gurney with the child strapped onto them. I am sure there are a variety of reasons that's the case. Generally, they're smaller children. We will see car seats strapped to the stretchers, and sometimes we see the more sophisticated child restraint devices. I would say part of that is a matter of education for EMTs and availability of equipment. And sometimes I can imagine that there are probably parent factors, not wanting to release their children. Exactly. Myron and Dave might be able to speak to that. more eloquently, but I can imagine that at a scene, trying to argue with the parent about, let me put this child in this restraint device could get a little bit testy as well.
Yeah. Tiffany, what are your thoughts about that? If you were on a crash scene, you were involved in a crash, and you had your child with you, let's just say your child, I don't know how old your child is, but let's just say your child was, 40 pounds or less, and you were injured, but the child wasn't, but, the child was clinging, mommy, and clinging to you, and the offer was made, well, we can transport your child in another vehicle, you're the patient, we've got to get you to the hospital. Can you talk a little bit about how you would feel and what your sense of would be the right thing to do, and just in light of the safety issues?
Yeah, Peyton has been put in, I believe it's called like the little papoose, where he'll be on like a basically like a stretcher board that's going to just kind of wrap him up in it. And if it was me that was injured, just because I know this is going to be what is best for my child, and he would be less likely to get injured in another instance where, like, if he was riding along with me in the ambulance and he was not restrained properly, if there's a crash there with that, what could happen to Peyton? So just speaking, I think if you approach the parent as saying, this is what's safe for your child, this is what's best for you, this is what's best for your child. I know myself as a mother, I would be fine with that. I mean, obviously there's going to be a level of anxiety there. One, because you're already injured, or something's going on with you, or something's going on with your child, but it just really has to be, the parent just has to be aware of, this is because it is a safety issue. And with me personally, myself, I would not be angry with anyone who told me that this is the way it had to be.
I think as healthcare providers, it is our duty to tell our patients what we think best practice is. And what I think would be helpful in your training courses is being able to script for some of the EMTs and paramedics about, we're going to put your child in this restraint device for their safety. This will enable us to better care for him or her. And if it becomes part of what you say as you're doing things like, I'm putting on these leads to monitor their heart rate, then I'm putting in an IV so that I can give them fluids. Is you talk to parents and explain what's happening. I think it will work a little bit better in terms of getting parents to buy in. I mean, certainly there are medical problems too. It's not always at the scene of an accident. You're going to a house, things are chaotic. A child might just have had a seizure, or might have croup and is respiratory distress, and they get agitated and upset when they're pulled away from their parent, and it looks like they're in more distress. But imagine, if you would, that the ambulance crashed and they were injured in the process of trying to help them. So I think we have to always remember what is safest, what is best practice, and adhere to that and try to advocate for that, and not just give in. I mean, no one ever plans a motor vehicle collision, and you always hope that it will never happen, and certainly you hope that it wouldn't happen on an ambulance. So, and retrospectively afterwards, wishing that you had is just really not going to work for anyone involved.
And I'm going to ask Dave the question. We've run into instances where maybe the parent or the child, either one, is seriously injured and the other is not, and there's that separation. One may be going to a level 1 trauma center versus the other occupant going to a local medical facility. Do you have any experiences with that? I know we have.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of great points that have been brought up. First, in cases of emergency, you really have to make decisions for people. They're not really in a state where they can make reasonable decisions. And talking to the parents is a huge issue about this. As a paramedic, I just really haven't experienced paramedics that, after you explain a process to them, are resistant to it. I just have never experienced that. The only concerns that I really see is parents becoming separated from their kids. As in, a parent is going to one hospital and a child is going to another hospital, or on different ambulances, even if they're going to the same hospital. Again, I think it's a lot in just how we're talking to our parents and explaining the process to them. So many people put the emphasis on the medication component, the IVs and the oxygen and all that, but a lot of what we do is just talking to people, explaining the process, and helping them through the process. So I've never really met any parents that were resistant once you talk to them and explain what's going to happen.
Have there ever been instances where maybe it's not the parent who doesn't want to be separated from their child, they want to hold the child on their lap to comfort them? Do you think how the EMT feels, like if the child is really upset and mommy and is just really crying, and do you think, is it reasonable to say that there might be instances where the EMT, for their own comfort level, well, okay, I don't want to hear this child screaming and the sort of, because they feel bad about it, and well, the hospital's just 3 miles down the road, and what would it hurt just to let them? I mean, does that happen, or am I just?
I'm sure it does. I mean.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Just because, my husband, as an EMT and firefighter, he's gone into situations where that's happened before. And the way that we kind of think about it now is anyone who has a child, our son is going to be 3 in May, so anyone who has a child, you kind of know what's going to happen if you have a cranky 3-year-old. If he's injured, if he's upset, if he's being taken away from his mommy, if they have a child, they know that. So it's just, and I don't know if it would be something, because I don't know if you guys have children or not, but if you could tell your EMTs, yeah, you're going to have children who are going to be resistant, who are going to pitch fits, who are going to cry and scream, and it's okay. It's just going to be their natural response. It's kind of the way we think about it now, is like, oh, if we're out and about and little kids acting up, it's like, oh, it's just their age. They're just upset. They miss nap time.
I really think one of the things I will teach the residents about working with children is you have to kind of go into your Zen mode. You know if you separate a child from their parent, they're going to cry. Even if it's just a minimal separation, you're going to let the parent ride along and they'll be right there. And you kind of just have to block that out. And that's just part of all the other training that goes on, and getting comfortable with children. And when I lecture to EMTs and paramedics, that's one of the things I talk about. You just have to get comfortable with children and recognize developmentally what's going to happen. And actually, you know what? A crying child is better than a non-crying child. Yes. The child that doesn't respond scares the bejesus out of a lot of us. So just getting educated and getting that comfort level is a really important thing, and understanding what's developmentally normal and what's not.
So I guess this brings us to, are there any circumstances where it would not or be appropriate to restrain a child in the back of an ambulance? Is it ever okay not to?
I don't think it's ever okay to not restrain any patient we have at the back of our ambulance, just for their own safety. Are there ways that we can improve that? Certainly. But I think the risk that you take for that 3 miles is not really worth the benefit in the long run if that ambulance is involved in a collision and is overturned.
But are there any restraint devices that are available that you could use for an ambulance? Are there any that would prevent a paramedic from giving medical treatment to that child? Are there any, are there any conditions, or are there any instances where is really not going to be workable?
Right.
I mean,
well, I agree with Myron. There are never circumstances where we can just accept that a child's not going to be restrained. For the most part, these devices are 3-point and 5-point harnesses, which allow us access, easy access to airway, easy access to their extremities, easy access to their chest. So I can't think of any cases, with the exception of maybe evaluating a child's back following a traumatic injury. I can't think of any cases where these immobilization devices would prevent our assessment. Physics is very active in the back of an ambulance. Objects will remain in motion until acted upon by an outside force, and everything does move towards disorder in an ambulance. So the focus is not necessarily preventing movement this way, it's preventing movement this way and this way and this way. So these devices really have to prevent any movement. And they do a very good job of that, I think. It's not just the movement of the patient, it's the movement of everything in the back portion of the compartment. So outside of immobilizing our pediatric patients, we need to secure everything else in the back of an ambulance. So,
by law, children are supposed to be restrained in car seats driving. So it just seems like a natural extension that they should be restrained in ambulances. And I've certainly seen a number of cases of parents who've pulled their children out of car seat restraints or never put them in because of whatever emergency they thought was happening. And I don't think we can honestly say that it makes sense to not take this into consideration. In fact, give it serious consideration. You might have to, for various conditions, make adjustments, and depending on what your restraint device is. But I can't imagine ever, like Myron saying, oh, well, we don't have to bother because it's it's so close, or they're so upset, or they're too injured, or you can't leave out something that's critical.
So what are the take-home messages that we want to bring to the EMS community?
Pediatric patients need to be restrained in an ambulance during transport, no exceptions.
And that's all going to hinge with the available equipment and adequate education on the equipment that's available to those EMTs.
And there was another message that I think was important as well, that no matter what, we have to realize that kids are going to be upset, the parents are going to be upset, a child may be crying and having a fit, but that's okay. And so that has to be part of the education to our EMS professionals, that that's okay and just have to deal with it. And the important thing to remember is that children always need to be restrained in the back of an ambulance. So keep everyone safe.
Expert medical care, fast decisions, good judgment, safe practices. This is what emergency responders do every day for people who are sick and injured. But what if there's a child on the scene? Ambulance compartments are designed to transport adult patients, not children. And you can't just make do with what you have. Children can be injured by sliding out of the head end of a gurney, by unsecured equipment that suddenly shifts, and by unrestrained EMTs or caregivers. The North Carolina Trauma and EMS rules now require that ground ambulances must have one pediatric restraint device available to safely transport pediatric patients and children under 40 pounds in the patient compartment of the ambulance. The goal? To prevent forward motion ejection, secure the torso, and protect the head, neck, and spine of all children transported in every ground ambulance. There are a number of devices for safe pediatric transport in emergency vehicles. Following are demonstrations of each pediatric transport device. All are quick and easy to set up and use. These demonstrations are based on the latest research into the subject of child transport safety in ambulances. The PediMate is a fully adjusting 5-point harness system that securely holds children weighing 10 to 40 pounds. It features 3 restraint straps that attach quickly and easily. It rolls up for compact, efficient storage and retrieval. See the manual for instructions on cleaning. To position the PediMate restraint, first, lock the stretcher backrest at an angle between 15 and 45 degrees. You want the patient's shoulders higher than the pelvis. Next, position the device with the black backrest strap at the patient's shoulder. Last, fasten the side straps to the main frame next to the head-end sidearm casting. Remember, the black webbing secures the device to the stretcher. The gray webbing secures the patient to the device. The 3 key steps to securing this device are: first, lock the backrest so the shoulders are higher than the pelvis. Next, position the device with the black backrest strap at the patient's shoulder. Last, fasten the side straps to the main frame next to the head-end sidearm casting. Remember, the black webbing secures the device to the stretcher. The gray webbing secures the patient to the device. Convertible restraints can be used 2 ways. Rear-facing restraints generally secure children weighing 5 to 35 pounds. Forward-facing restraints generally secure children weighing 20 to 65 pounds. However, some accommodate children up to 40 pounds, and others accommodate children weighing up to 80 pounds. Check the weight limits in the manufacturer's instructions before using them on stretchers. See the manual for care and cleaning. To position a convertible restraint, first, put the patient in the restraint to see if you need to make any harnessing adjustments before installing the restraint. Make sure the harnesses come out of the slot at or below the patient's shoulders. Position the restraint on the cot facing the foot end, with the backrest fully elevated, no more than 45 degrees from the vertical. Use both belt paths to secure the restraint. Last, put the patient in the restraint and tighten the harness. The retainer clip should be at armpit level. Remember, put the patient in the restraint first to make harnessing adjustments. The harnesses should come out of the slot at or below the shoulders. Position the restraint facing the foot end of the cot, with the backrest fully elevated, no more than 45 degrees. Use both belt paths. Last, put the patient in the restraint and tighten the harness, with the retainer clip at armpit level. A car bed is a 3-point harness restraint device for infants less than a year old, weighing 5 to 20 pounds and measuring 19 to 26 inches long. Use this device for infants who can't tolerate a semi-upright seated position or who, for other reasons, need to lie flat. See the manual for information on care and cleaning. Because they're designed for personal car use, car beds come equipped with just 1 set of loops. For this device to use in an ambulance, you'll need to order a 2nd set of loops. Never use the car bed with 1 set of loops. Position the bed across the cot with the infant's head toward the center of the ambulance. There is an adjuster on both the head end of the bed and underneath it. Make sure you close the O-ring after you adjust the bed to the infant. Raise the backrest all the way. Attach the bed using both sets of belts. The stretcher belt runs through both loops of the bed on both sides.
Tighten it down as you would.
Secure the infant in the car bed with the internal harness system. Remember, only use a car bed that can be secured with both cot belts. Never use a car bed with a single belt installation. put the bed across the cot with the infant's head toward the center of the ambulance. Adjust both the head end of the bed and underneath, then close the O-ring. Raise the backrest all the way. Attach the bed using both sets of belts. The stretcher belt runs through both loops on the bed on both sides. Secure the infant with the internal harness system. Inflatable devices are also an option. It's recommended you use only those inflatables with 5-point restraints and 2 belt paths, since they secure the child to the device, which is then secured to the cot or captain's chair. The main issue with inflatables is that some can only be secured through the back and attached to the stretcher. That means the bottom is unsecured. Plus, they can be hard and time-consuming to inflate. There are more effective restraint systems. The Safeguard Transport is a cot-mounted ambulance restraint for children weighing 22 to 100 pounds. A 5-point harness system with color-coded webbing, it was developed in collaboration with Riley Hospital for children. Easily stowed, follow the manufacturer's directions for care and cleaning. To use the Safeguard Transport, first unfold and position it on the stretcher. It's easy because it's color-coded. All you have to do is snap the color-coded webbing hooks into place. Next, position the backrest. For children 22 to 40 pounds, position the backrest between 45 and 70 degrees. For children 40 to 100 pounds, position the backrest flat up to 70 degrees. Next, secure the child with the 5-point harness system. You can adjust for height and tighten the harness with a patent-pending one-handed adjustment system. Remember, the Safeguard Transport assembles quickly and easily thanks to color-coded webbing hooks that snap into place on the stretcher. For children 22 to 40 pounds, position the backrest between 45 and 70 degrees. For children 40 to 100 pounds, position the backrest flat up to 70 degrees. Secure the child with the 5-point harness system. Use the one-handed adjustment system to adjust both the height and harness tightness. Integrated child restraints are the top-of-the-line devices. Weight limits vary. Check the manual and labels on the restraint for instructions on how to use it. With these units, it's important to follow the manufacturer's instructions carefully. For details on care and cleaning, see the manual. These are your most expensive devices because they are built into your emergency vehicle. Think of it as a custom fit. As you can see in this ambulance, the integrated restraint has a 5-point harness system and can restrain children weighing 20 to 50 pounds and measuring 28 to 47 inches tall. The most important thing to know about these units is that they are custom, unique to each emergency vehicle. So if your team is going to have one, be sure to carefully follow the manufacturer's instructions for how to use yours and with what size child. There are integrated restraint devices that secure infants, but to be safe, be sure to have handy the portable devices appropriate for infant transport in the ambulance. The most important thing to remember about integrated restraint is that each one is different. They are customized to your vehicle. You'll want to read and carefully follow the instructions for using these restraints. The instructions are in the manual and on the label attached to the restraint. You catch the call. You arrive on the scene to find there's an infant involved.
I lost control. I couldn't really see it. I don't know. My head hurts.
Relax. Hey, Kevin.
Luckily, the baby isn't injured, but her parents need transport. Fast. How do you transport the infant?
We can take the baby for you.
Okay.
Okay? She's really good. Okay? She'll take really good care, and we'll stay right there with you. Okay?
If you have an uninjured child to transport, the best solution is to transport the child in a different vehicle, in an appropriate child restraint. You'll want to check the device the child was in before transferring it to another vehicle, just to make sure it's undamaged. If there is no other vehicle on the scene and the child has to travel in the ambulance with a parent, you can put the child in an appropriate device in the front seat of your ambulance, but be sure to turn off the airbag. Never use a rear-facing seat or any child restraint device in the front seat if the airbag cannot be turned off. Again, if the car seat was damaged in the crash, make sure you have access to another. If no alternate transportation is available and the front seat cannot be used because you can't turn off the airbag, you could transport an uninjured child in a forward-facing captain's chair or EMS provider seat. Use an appropriate child restraint device, such as a convertible child safety seat or combination seat, installed according to manufacturer's instructions. Never use an infant seat. Also, the chair must be stationary, locked in place so it can't swivel. As an absolute last resort, a rear-facing captain's chair would work too, if that's what's available. Never transport a child on the bench seat or CPR seat. Never allow the parent, caregiver, or EMT to hold the child during transport. Safety is your #1 priority, not the emotional comfort level of the child, parent, or even yourself. Even if the child is older, age 8 and up, or weighing 80 pounds or more, it's still best to transport that uninjured child in another vehicle, if possible. Or, if all else fails, turn off the passenger side airbag and put the child in an appropriate child safety seat, secured in the front seat. Be sure to install the safety seat per the manufacturer's instructions. Never use a rear-facing seat or any child restraint device in the front seat if the airbag cannot be turned off.
So we've just seen a demonstration of the various pediatric restraint devices that are on the market. And we know that we're really selling these, and because it really is the right thing to do, to use these devices. But we need to be honest. How easy is it to obtain these devices, and how easy is it to use them?
I think the Office of EMS here in North Carolina has done a wonderful job with providing some of these devices to our ambulance providers. We know that that's probably going to make a very small dent in the actual need. So finding those monies in our budgets locally and making that a priority, I think, is going to take some time and some effort and creative ways of financing these things.
Yeah, we have measured what happens if we don't have these devices in place, and the improvement comes in the form of purchasing the devices, finding the money whenever possible, and putting them into our day-to-day operations.
And you don't necessarily need the $600 or $700 child restraint for your ambulance. What works for your service might not work for another service, so make it fit your service.
And how easy is it to use these devices?
Well, as a parent and a paramedic, it's very similar to the car seats that I use for my kids. Some of the other devices are very similar to the 3- and 5-point harnesses that we already have equipped on our stretchers.
And building on that, it's really no harder to teach a parent how to use their own child restraint in their personal vehicle than it would be to teach an EMT how to use these devices in the back of their ambulance.
EMTs are tactile learners. Although we can give them the brochures, it's best if we can actually put them in the field and do practical applications with them. They're very easy to learn how to use, but there is an education component to that.
What about for parents? How important is it to you, Tiffany, that children be restrained when they're being transported in an ambulance?
Safety for the child. I mean, definitely if there was anything, an emergency situation that came up where Peyton had to be transported, I would definitely want the best possible situation for Peyton, and with any type of restraint that would be helpful, that would be what I would like to be used.
And I guess just lastly, how can we help increase the use of these restraints?
I think that's going to be through education. The more we make them comfortable with using the equipment, the more we get their hands on it, the more readily they'll be used.
Bottom line, purchasing and using these restraints just has to be a priority. It's for the safety of the kids.
Ambulances are a safe haven for sick or injured patients, the first step on their journey to getting the medical care they need. But ambulances can have hidden hazards, especially for children. Unrestrained equipment, unrestrained patients, unrestrained EMS professionals. Improper restraint is dangerous. Your job is to keep everyone in the ambulance safe. These tips can help. Drive cautiously at safe speeds, observing traffic laws. Tightly secure all monitoring devices and other equipment. Make sure everyone is using the right restraint, the patient, the EMTs, and the other occupants. Transport children who are not patients properly restrained in another passenger vehicle if possible. And use the DOT NHTSA Emergency Vehicle Operating Course, EVOC National Standard Curriculum or equivalent. Don't drive at unsafe high speeds with rapid acceleration, deceleration, and turns. Don't leave monitoring devices and other equipment unsecured in moving EMS vehicles. Don't allow parents, caregivers, EMTs, or other passengers to be unrestrained during transport. Don't let the child or infant be held in anyone's arms during transport. Not the parents, not the caregivers, not the EMTs. And don't allow emergency vehicles to be operated by people who have not completed the DOT EVOC or equivalent.
So we've just seen a list of do's and don'ts for safe child transports and restraints. Which of these do's and don'ts do you think is the most important, and why?
I have to think that stowing the equipment in our ambulances is probably top of my priority list. We don't want anyone in the back of our ambulance, patient, caregiver, clinician, or otherwise, to be injured by flying equipment or projectiles.
I would definitely have to agree with that, because it's not only just for the safety of the child or the patient, it's also for the safety of the clinician. Because if you're not there, then who's taking care of the child or the patient?
Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a meeting with ambulance manufacturers, they brought up a great point. They've made a safe product for us. It's now into our hands to operate them in a safe fashion. And with that is obeying traffic laws, driving at reasonable speeds, and securing the equipment and our patients appropriately.
I'd have to add the biggest don't is don't let the child be held in the parent's arms. Just don't do it. Don't go there.
I would have to agree with that one, too. Absolutely. If a child is screaming and is upset, it's okay, that's normal, and don't ever use that as an excuse not to restrain them properly. Are there any of these that you think that EMTs would particularly have a hard time with, and why?
Yeah, there will be times where it's going to require a little additional time to put the piece of equipment together, but we need to make it a priority to take that time. Not only is our priority caring for that patient, our priority is to keep that person safe throughout our whole transport. So we need to take the time and make it a priority.
And Cheryl's already made it known that we don't need to allow our parents to hold those children on that stretcher. And I know as a medic that's very difficult when the child is crying and we get caught up in the emotions. But we need to kind of separate ourselves from our emotions and think what is the safest way for our children to ride in the back of our ambulances.
Okay, so in a perfect world, how do you see children being transported in an ambulance?
As administrators, we make it a priority to purchase this equipment so that it is available to our technicians. Training
and education is also going to be a huge part of that.
I think also to education just for those who, I guess maybe just to touch a little bit more on how to deal with a patient who has a very, or patient's parent who has a very high anxiety level, and just maybe ways on just how to communicate with them to make them feel more comfortable with the situation.
Throughout medicine, you strive to figure out what's best practice. Transporting children safely is best practice. And if nothing else, I would hope that at the end of all of this education, that the paramedics would feel that they understand what best practice is and strive to achieve it.
When something goes wrong, you're first on the scene, the front line of emergency response. The person people who are injured or sick depend on. The one who has to get it right then.
So why don't I go ahead and I'll take her and take good care of her for you. Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Take the time to transport children safely using appropriate devices.
There you go. Safe and sound.
Remember, we're here to help.
So we know that there's a problem, and we've seen the solution in this training video. So let's now summarize the importance of proper child restraint. Tell me why you think it's so important that children be properly restrained in an ambulance.
During 911 activations, the primary sickness or injury has occurred. It's our job to safely transport our patients and hopefully get some degree of improvement. And if during transport our patients are further injured because we didn't take the time to strap them in correctly, or we didn't take the time to use the appropriate equipment, then we're simply just not doing our jobs.
And I agree with that point, Dave, because I have to think as a parent, if that was my child that was injured or killed, how does that affect me as a parent? How does that affect me as a clinician? But what about the child that sustains a permanent disability and you have a loss of income because one parent has to quit work to stay at home with the child, or whatever the case may be? So I think there's a lot of far-reaching aspects of this, and it stresses the importance of why we need to do our job.
Agree.
Appropriate pediatric transportation, or it's just for the safety of that child. And that's what it all goes back to. It goes back to the safety for the child and the safety for the clinician.
Yeah, quality care is care that is effective, but it's also safe. And none of us are doing our jobs if we're not providing safe care. And that includes safe transport.
With all this training that folks have been viewing through this video, what is the take-home message that we really want to communicate to them?
Yeah, the duty to inform is sitting around this table. The next step is finding the money to purchase these devices. We need to educate our staff. We need to educate them about usage and the importance of it, and we need to put it into practice every time we transport a pediatric patient.
Never gamble with the lives of our patients.